Thank you so much for being here. For me, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm very international. This is my family. For those of you who just joined, my son married a Korean and they live in Australia. So for them, it's a highlight of grandmas doing this talk at Samsung because they love Samsung. What I wanted to talk about is this incredible opportunity that I have of seeding innovations that are going to make it in the market in 3, 5, or 10 years. I compiled a whole bunch of information about what's going on in life sciences. I was, something that Duncan didn't say was, I was a researcher for 14 years. I presented my first research paper when I was 15, and by the time I was 22, I had presented 8 papers at very reputable conferences around the world, and I was, of course, the youngest researcher in most of them. But then I figured out that I couldn't make the living that I wanted, and I moved from science to Bay and Shell, to the corporate world, because one of my students took me there. And then I moved to Boston. I did an MBA on entrepreneurship. I started 15 companies in 3 nonprofits, and now I'm back into supporting entrepreneurs in life sciences, which is something that blends 2 passions of my life. I'm going to start with life science research and funding's goal. And the goal used to be to prolong our life. That's what we wanted to do. And it has a lot of implications for things that are not directly related to our life, which is environmental issues, energy issues, taking care of water, air, pollution. So that is all related to our longevity. But what we've discovered in the recent years is that we don't want to live longer. We want to live longer better. We have a generation now that we've seen our parents live to an older age and not get killed because of wars or because of conflicts, and then we've seen them deteriorate, and we don't want that. So how many of you want to live up to 100? Now, how many of you want to live up to 100 with the vitality of a 40 or 50 years old? And then everybody raises a hand. So that's exactly where research is going to, and that is what we are supporting. And our conversations is going to be about those things. We're going to start talking about the major changes, and these are the changes that really transform the way we view life science research. Where are the trends? There are 3 completely different trends that we can tap into. What are the implications for us? And then we're going to open it for Q&As. So for those of you who are online, feel free to add it in the chat, and Poonam is going to compile them. The major changes are 2. The first one is that the human body is an ecosystem. It's not an isolated body that has to be kept in a purest form. And we'll dive deeper into that. And the second change is that the stakeholders are more important than shareholders. And this is a change in the business world. PwC just launched a whole initiative about stakeholders, not shareholders. We've seen with all this talk about climate change, how corporations have to have a say in that. In the political arena, how the impact of image is taking place. All of these has an impact in life science research and commercialization. But most importantly, we're understanding that healthcare is not siloed because it's very, very inefficient. So if we have different healthcare silos, there's no communication between the many stakeholders and the many key issues that affect our quality of life. And we don't share primary care practices. If one of us has a disease, we have no way of sharing the results of any things that we do outside of the medical field with other person. But we'll see how we're going to overcome that in a company that I invested, by the way. We're going to see that it's bad for patients, but it's also bad for society because it's more expensive, but it also creates a lot of trauma for healthcare professionals and for researchers. So this is not about maximizing every single profit that we can. This is about creating a better community for everybody. And that is the holistic approach that we see in life sciences. So let's start with the human body as an ecosystem and not as an individual. The latest trends are mostly including genetic studies, where we understand how our different organs have other microbes that coexist with us and help us. And there's more and more research being done about, does this have the, it's more and more research being done about the different parts of our body that are integrated and how we no longer need to know every specific detail, because those microbes are part of our community. In the same way that we see a forest as an ecosystem or a city as an ecosystem, we can start understanding that the community of everything we have is more important than the isolation. And this is one of the examples of the different parts of our body where we have known large bodies of a different ecosystem inside our body. It's called the microbiome inside of us, and how it's dispersed. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about what implications they have for medicine. The other thing is that life is not engineered. This is my late dog. She lived with us for 18 years. And I'm an engineer. So an engineer, you're used to breaking things down to figure out how they work and put them back together. You can't do that with life. You cannot take all the pieces of the dog, break them down, put them together and say, okay, now breathe. You're alive. You can't do that. So studying life sciences is very distinctive because it's not like an engineering study. It's not input, transformation, and output. There's many other considerations. And now we have the computing power to understand those things. So now we're moving from standardizing information to customizing solutions and to understanding more details of the problems that we face. This then creates the other transformation, which is the change from shareholders and value generated for shareholders to stakeholders and the value generated for stakeholders. In the case of healthcare, this has become more and more prevalent because now we can evaluate that. Now we can see the impact of other stakeholders. Now we see, for example, that the well-being of the nurses and the technicians and the doctors are as important as the well-being of the patients. Now we understand that governments and regulators need to fund healthcare and need to fund innovations in life sciences because they have a better image. I have a PhD in understanding the role of the scientist in the wealth created for academic research. And the result is zero. So the academic scientist does not benefit from the wealth created by academic research. But what I discovered was even more interesting, is that academic research in life science is the only type of basic research that creates more problems than solutions for the community. Why? Because it expands our life. That means that instead of retiring at 65 and dying at 70 or at 80, now we live another extra 20 years, which means that our cash flow for retirement has to be longer, but it also means that our carer have to be there for us longer. But it also means that our Social Security has to spend more money on new medicines and equipment, but it also means that the governments have to spend more money in validating the results and regulating new changes in methodologies. In the same way that when we started working with cancer, the first solution was surgical removal, and then we went into chemotherapy, and then we went into radiotherapy. So each one of those advancements created a big chaos for governments because then they have to add a whole body of knowledge to regulate those changes. So healthcare and life science basic research creates more problems for governments than solutions, which is very different than if we do material sciences or engineering or computational sciences. It's very, very different. And the reason why it exists is because we all want longer and better quality of life. So the private individuals are going to support the organizations and the companies where that exists. With this change from shareholders where profit is maximized to stakeholders, where value to all of them is maximized, becomes two big changes in the particular case of healthcare. One is the value-based healthcare that was regulated in the US a few years ago and created a whole bunch of changes and chaos, and is leading to blockchain. So now with blockchain, we can not only understand the validity of the medicines and the equipment, but we can also track down, oh, this person had this diet, and this person had this support system, and this group of people had this quality of air. And if we can use blockchain, we can make better decisions, not because it's the decisions that are valued for everybody, but we can create customized solutions. So where do these changes lead us to? They lead us to the three different trends in life science research. One of them is integration. Now everything is related. The other one is automation. How can we stop doing repetitive tasks, and what benefit do we derive from that? And the third one is validation. Specifically validations in a very short period of time in a very small scale. And we'll talk about that in more detail. Integration, it's really unique nowadays because chains that were before, it was not possible to connect, now they can be connected. And it sort of made sense. We all knew that, you know, if we're happy, then we have more productivity, or we have less susceptibility to some viruses. If you have a plant and you talk to the plant is gonna look better. Well, we didn't know how to measure that. And now we have the capacity not only to measure that, but to integrate different pieces of information. The most relevant one that I see now is the shift in our diets. So there's this huge interest in plant-based food, and it's shifting from just a piece of animal that you ate, and there are reasons why we have an assimilation of protein that is faster in tissues that are similar to our animal tissue, to plant-based food. And there's pros and cons, but the result is this humongous emphasis in new plant-based food. And we don't have the long-term view of what implications they have because we haven't studied that enough. There's a great book called The China Study that defines 14,000 people in China that they were following up. And they started understanding the impact of diet in those people. But what has happened now is that it's not only better for the body, but it's also better for the ecology, for the environment, because now we can track down the impact of animal food production. The other thing is that it has good taste, good texture, and we don't seem to substitute it completely, but it's representing a big shift in our diet. The other change in integration is what I was telling you about the microbe. So now we understand that the gut health has a very important impact in the way we process not only our diet, but our medicines. So new companies like Vast Biome are taking gut microbes, organizing the genes, not the microbes individually, organizing the genes, creating biologicals, and inserting them into other patients that have, for example, cancer, and have different responses to different treatments. And now, with the microcosm that we're gonna see, we can get a validation in hours instead of months. So in certain cases of cancer, we had to wait 4 or 5 months to see a response of a chemical reaction. Now we can see that within days, and then we can say, well, the people that are reacting better to this medication have these gut microbes. Let's put the microbes into the other patients. And we're starting to see new biological therapies that are changing that. We also see, for example, plant-based diets have very low acidity rate, and that has an implication in our liver, in our pancreas, in other organs. So we now, because we have the computational power, we can start understanding how these things are integrated in longevity and high quality of life. We start looking at sleep and exercise. We have, how many of you have the Fitbit? So that can start tracking on a real time, and if we have the computational, the data and the computational capacity, we can start seeing how that impact other people. We have 23andMe as well. We have other advancements that are making data more relevant because we can analyze the data. In terms of artificial intelligence, we have pattern recognition, prediction, and customization. So where are we getting to? We're getting into the predictive medicine and predictive wellness system. It's okay if you sleep 8 hours a day and you had a couple of nights where you didn't sleep. Well, what is the impact of 100,000 people that are going through that pattern? What do they do? How can we prevent you from being more susceptible to a virus or to something that is going to cause a problem in your body? So we're starting to see better outcomes. We also see faster failures. What do I mean by faster failures? Instead of having somebody dying of a disease over 1 year, that person might die within 1 month, but it would have a better quality of life. It would not have the impact in our cost as society, not only our capital costs, but also the cost on our carers. We also have lower costs because we know what works and what doesn't work. And we're going to have a better and higher impact. And all of this is basically anything that we can measure. If we can put it into the data, we're going to be able to use it if we have access to that data. And there are two new devices. I don't know if you've seen this. This was shown at the CSC a couple of weeks ago, and they were all over the place. There are two devices that are being developed as we speak. One is this contact lens, and the other one is a hearing aid that would transfer a lot of information on time to the doctors. This has a very exciting music. So this is a new type of contact lens that is powered with augmented reality. So what it tricks your brain in the same way that the music tricks your brain. It creates a reality that doesn't exist. It allows you to stimulate your visual nerves, but it also allows you to deal with depression, with mental illness. It allows you to see the food that you eat in a different way. It allows you to project with others what are you seeing in a different way. It's like having psychedelic drugs in a different way. The earpiece is amazing because the earpiece could tell your doctor this person is just about to suffer a cardiac arrest, or is going to have a stroke, or is going to have brain damage, or it has low oxygen. And it's the same device that people use for hearing aids. Now, the hearing aid is very interesting because my dad was deaf and blind during the last 3 years of his life. I'll have a joke about voice with my dad in a few slides. But he insisted that we put a hearing aid in one of his ears where he was completely deaf. And after 3 years, the nerve started reacting to high-pitched sound. So if we go to Bayer Court information about the plasticity of the brain, it is amazing what we can do when we stimulate our nerves in a different way. And that now has been demonstrated in these pieces of new devices, the bionic eye, the bionic ear, are going to stimulate our minds in different ways. Let's see. Okay. This is another interesting company. I did invest in this company. It's my health teams. And this is just basic connectivity. So if you have a disease, you want to talk to other people that have the same diseases. And you want to connect with them outside of your caring group. And you want to connect in a way that is very transparent. So this has huge implications, not only for the patients and their carers, but also for companies that provide solutions to these diseases and that are doing research. And then it's voice. So we're integrating voice. We all know that voice has an impact. If I tell you, just whisper a little bit and imagine that you are, close your eyes and imagine that you are in a meditative state. It's very different than saying, hey, let's jump up and let's do a little bit of salsa dancing. Or it's very different than say, hey, I told you to stand up. Voice has an impact. It has been recognized, but it has not been managed, and we don't know how to use it. So originally, we started using voice assistants. Like, how many of you have used Siri for something? Hey, Siri, call somebody. Or Google Assistant, or Alexa. I haven't used Cortana. But remember I told you that my dad was deaf and blind? We wanted to find a way that we can communicate with him. So I bought him an iPhone, and I bought him an Alexa. And I said, Dad, this is very simple. You take your phone, you press here, and you say, Siri, call Simo. That's my mom. Or you say, Alexa, call Simo. Now, he couldn't hear, but at least we would know that he needed something. And it was very difficult to talk to him because he was deaf as well. So we try to create this communication system. And after a while, he picks it up, and it says, wait. Siri, Alexa, your mom, too many women, I'm going to get in trouble. So this is a part of progress that has huge implications that we're not aware of. But what is happening as of late last year, is we start using voice as a diagnostic tool. So our voices has a unique thumbprint. But nowadays, we can evaluate the pain that we feel by our tone of voice. So if we call our doctor, or if you call ER, and you say, I need to see a doctor because I'm in pain, they would probably say, okay, after 4 hours, what is your pain level? The smiley face, the crazy face. Now, they can obviate that. And then they can triage your service based on that. Banks are also using that, for example, to recognize your voice as a double way of recognizing you. But using voice as a diagnostic tool has future implications. We can now evaluate people who are starting to have dementia, Alzheimer, or Parkinson's, and it's all based on voice recognition that is beyond what we're using. Also in hospitals, patients, they don't have to click a button to call the nurse. They can just talk to the nurse and say directly, I need this or I need that, and the voice system can translate that noise into executable items, and that helps the hospitals deal with their patients in a better way. And that leads us to automation. Most important part of automation is the capacity to sequence genes. I worked on gene sequencing over 35 years ago, and I remember looking at the chromosomes and saying, oh, this is so amazing, 500,000 triplets here embedded into this tiny nucleus. And then 23andMe and another couple of companies came and they said, oh, we can tell you what your genetic code is. Truth is that only 5% of your genome are genes. Now, I used to think, 95% is garbage because nature is smart and it's efficient. And they're not going to create new genomes as new beings come to life. They say, we're going to take a little bit of leaf, and we're going to take a little bit of nails, and we're going to put a little bit of respiratory systems here, and then they evolve. And we all thought that the reason why we have 90% of genome that are not genes was because it was a garbage. It turns out that the genes have other pieces of the chromosomes that are needed in order to become effective. If you take, so the genes have a key usually in another chromosome. The fascinating part is that if you take the key of the eye of a pig from a chromosome in a pig, and you put that key inside a developing wing of a butterfly, the wing will develop an eye. But it would not develop an eye of a pig because the gene of the insect's eye is very different than the genes of the mammal's eye. So now we are starting to understand that if we want to know about the genome, we don't have to focus on the bullet points. We need to get the whole story. And that's coming with genetic interpretation, where we can now read the whole chromosome and all the genetic function. And now we're starting to understand, what is this? And most of it, we don't know. We have no clue what that is. In the same way that when we're studying the biomes, we're not focusing, okay, we're going to check the 255,000 bacteria that you have in your gut, because it's going to take too much time. What we want to do is we just want to create just the whole sequence of the genomes that you have. That's why it's called biogenome, because there's a lot of microbes there. So we're not interpreting which one it is. We're just going to check them all and say, okay, if you have this composition, this is a reaction you have to your diet, to your lifestyle, to medicine, to love, to rest, to alcohol. So that's a big change now, and automation allows us to do that. The other one is drug printing. So I didn't know that until I saw a company that came to pitch to Sand Hill Angels. And I'm going to skip this into the printer. So when you go to a pharmacy to print your medicine, they actually create that, manually labor, like in the old days that you went to a pharmacy, and the old pharmacies had the little chemicals, and they put them all together. Well, now it's a little bit better, but we have the capacity to do a printer, and with that printer, we can create customized solutions in terms of colors. Why are colors important? So you don't take your partner's medicine. Shapes, why are shapes important? Because then the release is completely different. Concentration, we can go to minute details. Now you no longer have to cut 1/8 of a single tablet every 4 hours. You can do slow release. You can do many things with drug preparation. And that's another big change. And as I mentioned, it's not customized, it's not standardizing things, it's customizing solutions. Another big change in automation is surgical robots. And we were having a conversation a few days ago, and the word robot was used for the first time 100 years ago. And look, now it's so common. So we have these robotics supporters of surgery, which is very creepy. I have a friend who had an operation a few days ago, and she showed me her tummy. So she had 8 incisions, less than 1 inch large. And they can, if they are removing a tumor, they can explode the tumor and suction bits of it. It's just completely different. The important part of robots is not that you can't teach other people, you can bring more precision, you can use robotic surgery from people who are in other parts of the world. The important part of this, again, is that it captures data, and it allows us to do more things with data because now we have the computational power to do so. This is another one. Can you show Punjab, can you show the relay that you have? This is another one that I like, that I am an investor in.
We're constantly watching turnaround times. And what turnaround times is from the point that the sample was collected to the time the result is available to our physicians. In the clinic, it's really important. Our patients come before their appointments, and they're waiting for those results before they actually see the doctors to discuss those results. Well, that gives the lab 60 to 90 minutes to get that sample collected around and results within that time frame. So for a sample to be sitting there waiting just to be delivered over to the lab, it's crucial in that 7 week that we need. And so this constant moving
is always at sort of a decision.
Yeah, so this is a relay. Company is called Savio. They're also in office space, and they are also in hotels. The important part of having a robot taking samples around the hospital is that it allows the nurses and the practitioners to spend a little bit more time with the patient and hold their hands. So it doesn't substitute the human connection. It builds more connection into that. And that is part of automation as well. We think we're going to get to the point where we would have micro labs inside these relays, and we would be able to process the samples in the robot in the short future. Let me just move these here. And now we're going into validation, which is pretty cool. So you remember when I told you about the vast biome or the gut biome, and now we can also take all the Chinese medicine. What did we used to do before? We isolated every single piece because we needed to have controlled environments. So we said, okay, the ones in the first row, you take turmeric. And the ones in the second and third, you take mint. And the one in the third and fourth, you take garlic. And then the other ones, you take ginger, you don't take anything. Then after 4 weeks, we see who got a cold and who didn't get a cold. That was time consuming, that was expensive, and it was extremely inefficient. So what are we doing now? We do a compound database, not only of genomes, but also of the chemical compositions of these compounds. And then we study the human body as an ecosystem, not as an isolated individual. And then we go and we identify where it's working and where it's not working. And we can do all of that, not only because we have the data, but then because people are willing to share some of the information. So the Privacy Act on medical data is also making an impact. And then we go to the MicroCosmos, and this is I was just talking to Daniel about. This is a company I just invested in. I love this company. They are taking pieces of tissue and they're recreating the tissue. Now we all know that we could print tissue, but do you remember the story that I told you about the dog, that you can't break the dog and put it together, said, okay, now breathe, go, with your tail. Can't do that. So what do? They created, I'll show you that. They created first the tissue that is going to nurture the tissue that's going to nurture the cells. Let me just get this. So this is the pumpkin area, and in the back is the vascular system. So you can pump oxygen. This is how tiny it is. You pump oxygen and you pump blood. And you do that. And after you do that, you can print on top of it. So this is the breakthrough. They were in Nature, and the company they just moved here in, I don't know, January 7th. So it's very, very, very new. And this is the fascinating thing. So this is what they do. They take tissue from humans for our tumors, and then they add a gene, a fluorescent gene from an algae. And they put it together, and they grow these tissues on mice. And then they create an ink with that. And that ink goes into a bubble that has been formed, suspended into a vascular system that sends blood and oxygen into that little tissue. So in the near future, we're going to be able to say, oh, I have pancreatic cancer. Instead of trying to see how do I recreate healthy cancer, we're going to be able to say, okay, can you please take my pancreatic tissue, clean up the mess, bring the good ones, build it again, and insert it back. Or, oh, by the way, maybe I want it on this side. So that's where medicine is going forward. But we can do all of these things because we can replicate life at a very minuscule scale. Not because we can break it into pieces, but we can bring it into very minuscule cells. I don't know if you know that insects, for example, they have 7 rows of tissue, and each one has their own lungs, each one has their own kidneys, and each one has their own blood system. So if you take an insect and you force the disconnection between one segment and another, so one would continue to grow and the other one would not. We can't do that. You know, if I put something here and I stop the flow of oxygen and blood to this part, this is going to die. Well, in insects, you can segment those things. And all of these helps us understand life in a different way. This is another evaluation of a microcosmos. So these are different solutions, and these are different patterns, and you can do a matrix. And then you can say, well, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but instead of waiting 6 months to have 100 patients, which is the traditional way of developing medicines, we're going to do a test with one blood sample, and we're going to do a matrix, and then we're going to see the combinations between the different chemical products. And we can also do radio frequencies, and we're going to do bioelectricity. We're going to look at that now. Bioelectricity and liquid resonance. These are 2 companies that I'm investing in. Magnetic particle imaging is a little bit older, and this is Tivik. So how many of you has ever had sinus problems? So buy Tivik. It's really exciting, you know, and the technology was there for 20 years. It's just that the researcher didn't want to launch the technology and eventually found a consultant that became the CEO, and they're doing awesome things. They just won several prizes. Look them up. And all they do is they take a little gadget and you put it around your sinus, and it uses the bioelectricity of your body to concentrate and loosen up the substances that are clogging your sinuses that are causing the pain. Well, this has big implications because now you have a physical solution to a medical problem. You don't have to start eating medicines and drugs to clear yourself. Magnetic particle imaging is another change that I find it absolutely amazing. So when we started doing imaging, we started with heart tissue. How many of you has ever had an X-ray? So that's the heart tissue, yeah. And then we do magnetic resonance, and that's the soft tissue. Well, magnetic insight deals with liquid tissue. So now we can understand the blood, we can understand the brain, and we can see if we put something in the blood and it moves through the bloodstream, we can see what's happening. And these are all changes in validation, so we don't have to wait, you know, years or months with humans or with animals to define what works and what doesn't work. And the last piece of it is blockchain. So blockchain has been used a lot in finance, and now it has created a huge difference. First, in validating if the medicines that you're having are the correct ones. It's used extensively in Africa, but now you see all these companies that are coming to the market because they know exactly where things are related. It allows us to do a huge amount of interpretation because we have the data. And it's all based on patients and individuals controlling their own information. So you have nebular genomics, it's about your genome. You decide what to share. Doc AI is about your biome. So you remember when I tell you you can check your whole body as an ecosystem? So you can go to doc.ai. You have your records, your issues, your encryption, your care, your medicine, and your data sets patterns, and other patterns too. So everything can be related with blockchain. Before we couldn't do that. What are the implications for you? And I'm just going to the end. Well, the implications for you is to become part of the ecosystem. And you can do that as part of your job, as individual interest. You can become an angel investor too, or you can go and be a supportive of one of these companies. In these three different areas, in integration, automation, and validation. We have the opportunity to be in the largest life science ecosystems in the world, which is in California. It's the #1 state for life science employment. You have here 440 medical devices approved in 2016. We have over 3,000 life science companies. So there's a lot of things going on. But there's some new uses. There's some uses that are popping up all the time. For example, you create a lot of products that are used in homes. What happens if you can monitor the ethylene in your fridge to evaluate if the food that you're eating is rotting or not? How come you can manipulate the oxygen content so you can have fresher fruit or prolong the life of the fruit? And maybe you can then evaluate the effect of that in people's well-being. How can you use voice to recognize if somebody has something that is urgent, that needs some urgent response or not? So all of that is happening in this area. The trick is that if you want to be at the forefront of innovation, you need to have early access. And where do you have the access? Think tanks, research consortiums. These are kind of harder to get into. Angel groups and incubators. I like a quote in Australia about foster parenting. Not everybody can be a foster parent, but everybody can help a foster kid. Nobody can be an entrepreneur in life sciences, but anybody can support a life science entrepreneur. And with this, I want to thank you for listening to me attentively, not falling asleep. And thank you for being here at this time of the day. And I'm opening it up to questions.